What is up, Wizards fans? Welcome into another Bleav in Wizards podcast. I'm Matt Moderno. That is not Jahadi White joining me here today. I got my man Greg Finberg coming on. Greg, thank you for joining me and Happy New Year.
Thanks, Matt. I'm always happy to join you on the pod. I'm a big fan of the pod, so it's always nice to be on the pod myself.
Likewise, appreciate you, sir. We were just talking a little bit offline. You are at a basketball powerhouse up at Penn State now, looking pretty good. So got the right guy for the job here, locked in on all things good college basketball in the area too.
Yeah.
All right. So before we get going, brought to you by Stateside Vodka and their Surfside Hard Iced Teas, hard lemonades, hard every flavor you can think of, and BetOnline. BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to live in-game betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen. With the largest selection of odds on everything from football, NBA, college basketball, NHL, and UFC, head to BetOnline and don't forget to use our promo code Bleav, BLEAV, for your welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline. The game starts here. All right. So, Greg, I wanted to just start with the question I have been getting the most frequently from Wizards fans for the last, I don't know, let's say week here. Are the Wizards suddenly too good? Are they going to play their way out of the Cooper Flagg sweepstakes? Oh, we appeared to be frozen. Okay. Well, there we go. We lost Greg. So, that's how it works in show business, folks. There's always some amount of technical difficulty here. But we'll get Greg back here in a second. Let's see how that actually worked. All right, Greg, you with us?
Yeah, my fault. Sorry, Wi-Fi issues.
That's okay. We can go phone if you want to. That might.
I'm all good. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Cool. Where I was going with that, the question I've gotten most frequently from Wizards fans here: are the Wizards suddenly too good, and have they ruined their chances to wind up in first place for the Cooper Flagg or Dylan Harper or Ace Bailey sweepstakes?
Yeah, I mean, I got the same question that you got when the Wizards won 2 straight games against the Hawks to begin the season. And that was when the Hawks were the Hawks are like 17 and 15. Like they're pretty good now. But when
They're
you looked
healthy
into the
again.
beginning of the year, you didn't really know what they were. And they didn't really know what they were either. But now they're figuring it out. So you had a Wizards team that beat a pretty bad Hawks team twice in the beginning of the year. And these last couple of games, they've kind of been Hornets merchants. I mean, they beat the Hornets twice, a team that they should beat. They beat the Bulls. And that's kind of where we are at right now with that. And honestly, when you look at Tankathon and you look at the pick odds and all that type of stuff, the odds for when you get the the worst record, the second worst record, the third worst record, they're kind of similar. If we're being real, I mean, you get 14% chance, 13.4% chance, and then a 12.2% chance for the first, second team or the second worst team. So I don't necessarily think it really matters to be honest. And I think the Wizards are a bad team. So once you offload a lot of guys, having too many issues.
I'm of the same opinion, honestly. Like it won't hurt in the long run, I think, in this front office. Isn't going to let them be too good. I think that's the nice thing that, a couple years ago, the Wizards went on that little win streak at the end of the year and ended up dropping or ended up winning a couple games that they probably shouldn't have in retrospect or shouldn't have wanted to win. And it ended up being the difference between drafting somebody like a Shaedon Sharpe, who hasn't made huge strides that I think we all thought he would have going into this year, largely because of health. But you end up with Johnny Davis, who just by all accounts probably isn't long for the NBA here. So, we'll figure that out a little bit here. But if you're the Wizards, Will Dawkins isn't going to let this team suddenly, rally its way to the play-in or something to that effect. It's just not going to be in the cards for them. Everybody knows what the assignment is. They're not going to squander this year's tank. But they are better, which is great for us from a Wizards fan perspective, to watch better basketball, see the young guys kind of doing their thing. We'll get into some of the individual performances here in a minute, but we're doing this on the heels of a 125 to 107 win over the Bulls. It was the Wizards' best game of the year, in terms of how bad they actually beat a team. It wasn't like a nail-biting tough win at the end against a bad team. It was a pretty solid end-to-end win against, honestly, I think the Bulls are a bad team, and that's fine. But their record isn't awful. So it's probably the best, most thorough win I think they've had so far this season. So they've won 3 of their last 10 or 4 of their last 11. They're now 6-25, which is still obviously not great. So I think there's no cause for panic there. Their next game is against the Pelicans. That's tonight at 8 p.m. The Pelicans are 5-29, so this really is probably the prime competition for that top pick sweepstakes. I don't know. Do you see back-to-back wins in the Wizards' future here, Greg?
I don't. The Pelicans have actually been playing pretty good basketball as of late.
Yeah.
They should have beat the Nuggets. They went to OT and they lost. They should have beat the Clippers the other night. They ended up losing a nail biter. They just lost one at Miami that no one really expected them to win. But apart from Ingram and Zion, like they're kind of whole now.
Mhm.
Everyone's back, and they're figuring stuff out slowly. Like they're in a weird spot because they were kind of all in, and now they like really are. There's no chance they make it back. They'd have to go on an unbelievable run. And even if they do and they get to like 40 wins, like you're in the play-in, you're in the same spot as you were last year. You're
Exactly.
probably not going to make it out. And even if you do, the Thunder are what awaits you. Like it I think they're just gonna phone it in. I think Ingram wants to get traded. It's possible that he gets dealt.
Mhm.
Zion is ramping up to return, but what's the point for an injury-prone guy if he's just playing games that don't mean anything?
Yeah.
And I'm sure they're bound to get more. I mean, you have a bunch of injury-prone players on one team. Like, what did you expect to happen other than injuries? And you compounded that by acquiring Dejounte Murray, who's another injury-prone player. So I don't think there's really any path for them to want to improve. They're not going to get anywhere. They're going to make trades. And so I think they're going to be really close right there with the Wizards. This 2-game stretch is important because I think both teams benefit from losing both games. However, for a young team like Washington, they have a chance to go 4-4 in their last 8 games. Like,
Pretty
it's
cool.
cool to see the improvement while also being a little bit nervous that they are playing a little bit too well. But like a team like Toronto, they're kind of healthy again. Quickly came back to like 29 points and 15 assists in this first
Yeah.
game since November 10th. Like Toronto's going to win some games. And obviously, once you get away from like the bottom 5 of the
There's
NBA
big
standings,
separation there. Yeah.
it's a big separation. I mean, when you look at it, you got Portland at 11 wins and Brooklyn at 13 wins. They're the 6th and 7th worst teams in the league. And then you
Mhm.
drop off to an 8-win Toronto team. And then it's the Hornets, the Wizards, the Jazz, and the Pelicans. I think that's the real competition. Um, I feel like the Hornets just like always start decently and then just stop playing good basketball.
Yeah.
A team like Utah should be a lot better
Mhm.
than they are right now. And I mean, New Orleans is going to be down there. So again, when you look at the lottery odds itself, it doesn't necessarily help the Wizards for being the worst team. It just gives them the cushion because they can't fall past the 5th pick, and I think that's
Right.
kind of what people want.
Yeah, just having that certainty to know your floor is 5, and that would still take, decently unlucky odds, which is not something the Wizards are totally unaccustomed to. It is kinda nice. Would you rather be New Orleans right now, a team that wanted to win and just can't? Or would you rather be a team like Washington that is really, really bad, but intentionally really, really bad? And think about this, like, there's probably still more pieces and trade assets and stuff for New Orleans, but there would still be like a tear down that has to happen here. That there's stuff to actually tear down, I guess, which is great. But they're bad, and they haven't really kind of even begun that tear down process yet.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the Wizards with Beal. Like
Yeah,
in the
same.
beginning days of when Beal was kind of the guy, it's like you have Bradley Beal, and you have a couple other pieces, but you have nothing in reality. Like you are
Mhm.
going nowhere. You have no plan, and you got to either get in or get out. You can't just be there. And like the Pelicans, you like they're trying to win. This was like their all-in best roster since like Anthony Davis years. And it is not because the roster is bad or because the coaching's bad or anything. They're injured. And sometimes seasons like that happens. You look at Memphis last year, the season was over before it even began because of the Morant suspension, a bunch of injuries. Marcus Smart gets injured early, and like it's just a lost season. But then they come back. They didn't really make any big moves. They drafted Edie, and they are a top 3 team in the West. So I
Sure.
could see New Orleans just coming back and running it back, taking the hit this season. Um, but again, I'd be the Wizards 10 times out of 10. And that's what's funny. Like you play a team like Chicago, and it's like, man, what are you guys doing? I mean, they
Purgatory. Yeah.
it's purgatory, and that's what makes me feel a lot better about the rebuild is when you play teams like that. Even if you beat teams like that, like they're in 10th in the East, they're 15 and 17, they're going nowhere. Whereas the Wizards, like they just beat them, and they are only in basically year one of this rebuild.
Yeah, we don't
So
want to win and we still beat you. Yeah.
exactly. So I 10 times out of 10 rather be Washington than New Orleans.
I would go the other way personally, just
Mhm.
because they're going to probably play their way into a top 5 pick in a good draft. And you can get stuff for Ingram and you can get stuff from Zion. And honestly, like Trey Murphy is probably a more appealing piece than anyone on the Wizards roster right now. Like I like Bilal a lot, but what you could get for Murphy right now, I think is probably, higher in the grand scheme of things. And he's on like a heater the last like 5 games here. Had 34 points the other night against Miami, 18 and 4 and 6 against the Clippers, 35 against Memphis, 21 against Houston, 21 against Denver. These are like real teams. And he's, I think you could get like a king's ransom for a guy like that. Whereas I don't really see that piece on the Wizards roster, but I agree with you in terms of like direction and where they're at, like that I think is
Mhm.
nice to just say like we've committed to a path here and we're not really in this like interim thing. I just think
Yeah.
that's the one difference for New Orleans. Like if they did want to tear it down, they'd
Mhm.
get way more back for those guys than we ever would have got for Beal and stuff like that.
Now, let me ask you this, like, imagine they trade BI at the deadline or in the
Mhm.
offseason. They keep Zion, they keep everyone together, and then they draft, like, Cooper Flagg. Like, do you see them at that point as a team that can truly contend with, like, a team like the Thunder, a team like Memphis? Because granted, like, you still have the roster, but everyone's just always injured. It's
Yeah.
never been a talent thing with the Pelicans. They just every year, it's something. So do you still would you view them as a contender if they get the top 5 pick at Flag and all that?
I would totally rip it down to the studs if I were them at this point. Honestly, I would see what I could get for DeJounte Murray. If CJ McCollum have any value around the league, what could you get for Zion if you traded him? What could you get for Ingram? Does Herb Jones have value? Like there are pieces there. I think guys like Jordan Hawkins, even BJ Boston's playing really well. Eve Missy looks like he's a piece for them for the future. So like they're kind of at the same place Washington is at. And if they do just say like F it, let's be full tear down deconstruction phase as well, they just get such a huge jump start over I think where Washington is. Like they'd equally be as bad as us from day one, but plus 5 or 6 extra first round picks at a minimum. That's kind of a nice piece. So I'm with you. I don't think
Mhm.
that they're like one tank year here away from building this like suddenly competitive roster, but I think they could leapfrog us pretty quickly in the rebuild phase if they wanted to do that, which I don't know that they do. So
Yeah, that's actually a really good point because when you consider what the Wizards got for Beal and for KP, like they were at the
nothing.
end of like their value,
Yep.
whereas the guys in New Orleans are kind of at the peak of their value. I don't know about Zion, but like guys like Murphy, Herb Jones, like they can get a lot for them, whereas the Wizards had to settle for whatever they could get. So yeah, I think I was 10 out of 10 Washington. You're kind of bringing me a little to that side. I think I'd still go with the Wizards, but not as confident.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how teams around the league actually view Zion. Like the talent is unreal, but he makes a lot of money to not play a lot of games. So what would you really get for him in return? I think is the question. And if teams were really like bending over backwards to get Brandon Ingram right now for a price tag that the Pelicans would actually take back, I think we would have seen a deal by this point. So that'll be just kind of interesting to monitor throughout the year here. I think. Let's pivot back here. The Wizards, according to Chase Hughes, have had the toughest schedule in the NBA so far this season, over 55.5 winning percentage for their opponents, and have the easiest remaining schedule, about 45% of any team in the league. So this goes back to like, hey, they're playing a little better, kind of at the wrong time. I'm doing air quotes for anyone listening to the audio version of this. Like the schedule's about to get easier, and they suddenly look more competitive. But I think you nailed it up front. Like the front office is just gonna like move everyone out of here that's contributing real value, I think. But also the young guys are driving winning, I think, here too. The improved play of Alex Sarr's made a big difference here. And then that's probably the next piece I want to get into. But just one last thing on them improving. This was from Josh Robbins, a quote from Malcolm Brogdon that he tweeted out. This is actually just getting better every day. We won that one game. Maybe that was Denver or whatever game it was. And we've seen ourselves, even with the losses after that game, get better every day, every practice, every game. That's actually what we're seeing on the court here. I think like they look a little sharper. They looked a little more locked in from start to finish. And I think the ball movement has just been better kind of overall here. Like you could point to there's some noise from like a 3-point shooting variance that's made their defense a little bit better, kind of by luck maybe. But I do think that the effort has been a little more consistent. And that's something we see from young guys a lot. Like you got to see what it takes to win in the league. And then, also you got to just make some shots. And they're finally doing that a little bit too.
Yeah, I think defensively has been an upgrade. I think Josh tweeted this out as well. They were 30th for a while in defensive efficiency. I think they're up to like 24th or something now. Like
Yeah, for the last month.
Great, but better. And I think being healthy has helped. I think Brogdon coming back has helped a little bit. But I think my main takeaway from why they've been successful is the rotations and the lineups. Like they've pivoted from mismatching the vets and the rookies to like the younger guys are starting with Poole. And then you got Valanciunas and Brogdon and all them coming off the bench. Kispert coming off the bench. And you're starting Bleav, Poole, Carrington, Sarr, and Champagnie, who's been terrific this last month. And I think that is where you've seen the most success because those lineups work, those rotations work, and guys are playing with guys that they play well with, and they're figuring stuff out like that. That's something I always wanted to see. Like I didn't really like Valanciunas starting alongside Sarr. You have no spacing at all. Your lane is clogged up, and I get you want to match size with size against some big teams, but I never liked that, and it never worked. And Brian Keefe kind of realized that, and now he's starting Sarr. He's got JV coming off the bench. It's a nice little tandem, and the rotations and everything's kind of fallen into place, and that's why they've been so successful. So I think they've kind of figured things out this last month. The defense has helped. Shots are falling as well. I mean, the rookies are all getting better. Jordan Poole has gone nuclear. That's also helped. And I think you've seen what we're going to talk about Poole, I think, in a sec, but how steady it is at the end of games. Like when you saw against New York, where they didn't have Jordan Poole, they really didn't have any shot. Like they didn't know where to go. You saw the last possession, Bleav, not his fault, but the play got blown up to Champagnie in the corner, and he was just kind of there. He took a mid-range shot, wasn't really close. Versus Poole, it's going to him. He's going to take a shot. And that's kind of what I noticed as well is down the line, late game, because they've been close games as well. They've been able to finish because Poole's kind of taken initiative. And that's been something I've also seen.
What was the one where Poole hit the game winner? Was that against Charlotte?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I hated everything he did down the stretch of that game until he made the shot, right? Like, but I'm with you. Like, even if you take bad shots, which I thought he settled for a couple bad ones in a row, and then he finally made the last one. But it is an NBA talent to be able to get shots off with an entire defense knowing you're going to take that. And we didn't really see that from him the same way last year. Like he wasn't generating even like halfway decent looks for himself in some of these situations. Whereas this year, that's a makeable shot for him. Like his step back three has been relatively consistent. And I think that was probably the closest of the group. And, he was within 28 feet for that one too. So I think you can live with that a little bit, but yeah, just, there's got to be other guys on this team who develop as like shot making potential here. Can Bub be one of those guys eventually? Can Bilal start to do it a little bit more consistently? And maybe you see that when there are situations where Poole isn't in and things. And that's a learning experience, even in the end of that Knicks game. Like at least you got some, I don't know, semi-meaningful data point about where your other guys are at in terms of being able to take those reps. So I'm not mad at that either. I'm with you. Poole's been a lot better. Let's go to that and we'll circle back to Sarr. So Poole's averaging like just under 28 points over his last 5 games. The Wizards have won 3 of those 5 games, which is awesome to see. And just the stat line against Chicago, I mean, 6 of 13 from 3 is just nuts. And the 30 points is awesome. He is a legitimate 3-point shooting weapon in this league. And I do think that does make it easier for these other guys because he's got gravity. Like I don't always love the 28 footers, but the fact that he is willing to shoot them and he makes enough of them, it does stretch a defense. And I think that makes life easier for Koulibaly or Champagnie or any of these other guys that are going to try to get downhill a little bit too. So just props to Jordan Poole. I know I'm by the Jordan Poole stands, a Jordan Poole hater, but this is much more in line with what we want to see from him. And honestly, Greg, like I'm impressed that the defense is like still kind of held up. We saw years where like 5 or 6 games into the season, Beal would be like strapping guys up and then it would fade eventually. But Poole's still like not a great individual defender, I don't think, but he's still getting hands on balls. Like he's getting in passing lanes a little bit, and he's at least trying to be active. And I think that's honestly enough from him at this point.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the defense first. He's sixth, I think, 1.6 steals per game in the NBA, which is unbelievable for a guy that everyone said is a liability. And steals don't equate to being a
Right.
great defender. Obviously, you can just be in the right place at the right time.
But you have to think about him, right? Like he's
You do.
kind of free safety a little bit.
Yeah, he's feisty on the defensive end, and that's what you like. A lot of players aren't great defenders. They aren't quick. They don't have the size, but like they just scrap and they know where to be. They're smart defenders, and I think he's kind of been smarter on the defensive end, picking his spots, knowing when to go for a ball and when not to. He's also averaging half a block per game, which for a guard,
Yeah, not bad.
isn't unbelievable, but it's still solid and it's a career high as well. And the funny thing is, you mentioned you didn't like his shot selection when he had the game winner against Charlotte. I didn't either. I mean, I literally tweeted out like the Wizards are down 2 with like 10 seconds left. I think it's going to go to Poole. I really hope it's not a step back 3 because he had missed his last 6 down the stretch and he hit it.
Yeah.
To his credit, he hit it. I still think it was I wouldn't say a bad shot, but again, you kind of knew that was going to be the case. It's kind of like that's probably the best shot they're going to get. And I'd rather him take it than anybody
I
else
agree.
currently on the floor because he's been in that spot before. And so again, I agree. I didn't like his shot selection. A lot of
It
times,
was a no, yes. Like as a
yeah,
coach, even you're probably like, no. Well, okay, he made it. Also,
uh,
be clapping,
yeah.
you dap him up.
Honestly, I don't like his shot selection a lot of the times, but like he makes them. It's the same thing. Like Steph Curry shot is a Steph Curry shot. It's not like an anybody else shot because he's the only one that can make it. Last year Jordan Poole was probably taking similar shots. He just wasn't making them, and that's why everyone was like, take better shots. And this year he's making them. This year he's efficient. He's shooting 41% from 3, which is I think a career high, but like 6 percentage points.
Yeah.
So all of that and like it's translating to winning lately. You mentioned they're 3-2 in his last 5 games. A chance to go 4-2 tonight against New Orleans. So the whole thing, even when I tweeted out the Jordan Poole career highs thing, everyone was like, "What's their record? They're 5-25." Number one, they're tanking. They
Yeah, they're
probably
not
have
trying to win.
the one of, if not the worst rosters in the league. Definitely the youngest roster in the league.
Mhm.
And he can't do it by himself. He can't win games by himself. And so, despite how bad the team is, he's doing everything he can. And it's funny because last year everyone was like, "Just wait, he's going to get traded. His contract's terrible. We need to move on." And I think a lot of people have roped those takes back in and kind of said like, he's only 25 years old. Like he can really be a piece for this team. It seems like he's very liked by his teammates as well, which is a big thing for a vet. So I think he's just come in here and completely switch the narrative from last season to this season. And it all started with the switch to point guard.
I think the fact that you could trade him, it just says a lot, right? Like where he was in the
Mm-hmm.
league last year, the way he played, and the amount of money he made, there was no team in the league that was going to give you positive assets for that. If you wanted to trade him now, I think you would get a positive net return. And that just speaks to like the amount he's flipped it around. And I think if you're certain playoff teams, like you could make a real case that there are teams that like this guy would actually be a missing piece for. And if you're Washington, I don't think they should be in any rush to move on from him. I don't think you need to do it. I don't think he's like holding the young guys back or anything like that. I do think you need one high usage vet to kind of take the pressure off those guys. But I actually think his trade value can continue to go up. I think there's still room to mature as a playmaker. Like there's a lot of like, still 1 assist, 4 turnover kind of games. And if he can start to clean those things up, that'll be good. But also just he was doing a lot of this with like nobody making shots around him. Now you've got guys like Sarr that are suddenly 3-point shooting specialists as well. Like Hispert's starting to make a few looks. Champagne's doing pretty well. That actually should make life easier for Poole here, too. Because like you can't get assists if guys aren't making any shots. So I think that'll help things. But also, if I now have to guard Alex Sarr out to the 3-point line, theoretically that opens up the middle a little bit here too. So I think he's making the younger guys' lives easier. But I think in turn, them actually capitalizing on that makes his life easier too. And if he keeps stringing a couple more 30-point, 6 of 13 nights from 3 together, then maybe you do have to at least weigh your options about, hey, if Denver will give us X, Y, and Z, or Orlando will give us this player and this pick, you at least have to consider it, right? So I think that's just a good spot to be in, to have those options, to not need to trade someone. but you could theoretically if you wanted to. So I'd rather take that than the alternative.
Yeah, I'd like to see, you mentioned it, like his potential assists from this season to see like how many he could have. But it is noteworthy. I mean, you mentioned all the career highs and points and steals and all that. It's career high, I think, 3.5 turnovers per game. And while I do think his playmaking has improved this year, there's a lot of mistakes, and he's still growing. You got to remember, he didn't play point guard really all of last season. And it's just crazy to think, like, and I don't want to, like, kick a man while he's down and go in on Wes Unseld Jr. again, but, like, it is crazy to think, like, how did you not realize this? Like, how did you not see him as a point guard? How did you not even make the switch at some point in the season to where it had to take a coaching change to unlock this player? Because imagine they don't do that. And this is why I think everyone was saying, like, move on from Wes now, because he was holding right now your best player so far back from what he could be. Jordan Poole had mentioned even during when Wes was there, like, I need to play point guard. I'm a point guard. And it took Brian Keefe, 1 or 2 games to play him at point guard. And it's completely changed his career, completely changed how he's viewed by the NBA and by Washington fans. And I think that's something that people kind of forget is like last year was a positional struggle versus this year. I think he's where he needs to be.
You look at Wes as just sort of like this old school coach. I think of like, well, I can't demote Tyus Jones because he's playing too well. Like Jones was the better player overall last year. I obviously think everyone, or he performed better last year, I would say. Whereas I think people would say Poole is the much more talented player. Jones wasn't, his individual play wasn't the problem. It was just the fit. And I think they've kind of cleared that out of the way and just said, like, hey, we're committed to this experiment. There really is no plan B here. If Poole at point guard hadn't worked out, I mean, they'd be bad anyway, and they can still live with those consequences. So, yeah, I'm with you though. Like that was a problem for Wes. You needed to find a way to stagger those guys' minutes or do something more to create those opportunities for Poole enough of the time, at least to get some rhythm. So we'll see how it kind of plays out. The other guy we mentioned there that's just playing a lot better recently is Alex Sarr. I was just named Eastern Conference Rookie of the Month, which is amazing. I think I got this from Chase as well. Alex Sarr is also the first Wizards Rookie of the Month since Bradley Beal in 2013, which is it's a very long time to have not had. It's a very long time for a bad franchise to have not had one Rookie of a Month, and like that's honestly kind of crazy when you think about it.
I mean, if Yannick Nzosa had ever come over, I think he might have gotten that.
Look out, NBA.
Yeah, but I mean, it kind of shows like the Wizards draft history ever since Brad. I mean, Otto was a hit after that, but apart from that, it was kind of slim pickings. Kelly Oubre was like a good pick as well. But you go all these years with guys like Johnny Davis, and you don't really. I mean, during the John years, didn't have a top pick for a while. But these guys have kind of come in and kind of done well already, and it's early still. But it is funny to think like. You had people in summer league. I have a whole. I'm not going to release the tweet until like Alex Sarr like is like an all-star or something. But the amount of screenshots I have of just replies, people calling him Kwame Brown after one summer league game, people calling him a bust. It's crazy to me that people think summer league is going to translate over to the actual NBA. And you had people, Rockets fans specifically, talking about how did we get the best player in the draft at number 3? Reed Shepherd is way better. I mean, Reed Shepherd, I think, has made like 28 field goals this season. Alex Sarr made 25 threes in December.
Right,
like
exactly.
It's and different situations, different roles, less minutes. I get that, but even Shepherd's struggling from the field. He's not the 3-point shooter right now. That Sarr is, and it's funny because he's supposed to be the sharpshooter. They called him Cocaine Curry or something like. It's funny to me, and I don't want to take a victory lap now, but I think you obviously preached it. I preached it. Patience with Alex Sarr. He's 19 years old, and it's crazy to see like he shot 19% from 3. I think 11% from 3 in summer league, 19% from 3 the first, or 25% from 3 the first and second month of the season, and then 45.5% in December. So it just goes to show like he's only 19. He's going to keep getting better.
I don't mind fans overreacting because that's what we do inherently, but you do need to be able to say, you know what, looks like maybe I was a little premature on burying him completely after 2 months of his NBA career, because he looks like a contributing NBA player. We can argue about what the long-term ceiling is or which one of them will look better in 3 years. All that's fine. But this is one of the all-time busts because of a summer league game. Will remain one of the stupidest things I've ever routinely heard from people. You mentioned his month of December, about 14 points a game, a little over 6 rebounds, just under 2 blocks a game, and 45% from three. I'll continue to say I still would like to see him get a few more easy looks around the rim just to get him going and get some confidence, but they're committed to Alex Sarr as stretch big, and he's making them look smart here lately. So obviously that number will come down a little bit here at some point and normalize, I think. But hey, I'm happy with the result, and if he can hit them, then they're good shots. I still maintain it would have made his life a little easier, and we're giving him a lot of credit for persevering, the first couple bad months of the season. But I think that is a little bit of a failure of the coaching staff of not just easing him into things, like letting him dip a toe into the water. But hey, whatever, it's working and we're getting the results we want. Bijan Todd has had a couple really great interviews and clips with other players about just their reaction to some of these Wizards rookies. And most recently talked to Karl Anthony Towns. And Towns said he's special. He's already affecting the game at 19 and impacting the game. We all know the talent that he has. I thought that was really cool. And then similarly from Brian Keefe, Bijan asked about Sarr's willingness to sort of start to bang his way in the paint a little bit more and start to be more physical, rather than settle for tough jumpers. And, whether that was something that they were instructing him to do from a coaching staff perspective or just him learning on his own. And Keefe said it was a little bit of both, which I think is cool. But, that's good. I mean, that must mean that they're telling him, like, hey, like the shot diet you're doing, now you've seen enough sample size. Like, in retrospect, I've been hard on them for that. But sometimes players need to like learn for themselves, like, hey, maybe this doesn't work. And then they'll be more receptive to the message. We let you try it your way. It didn't work. Now this is what we want from you a little bit more. And I think that's a way to get through to some of these younger players. So credit to Keefe. I think that piece of it has kind of been like a nice trial by, fire, trial by error learning experience for Sarr.
Yeah, the layups and getting inside, that's one of the things that I've seen apart from like individual defensive matchups and stuff. But he had against Chicago, there was like 3 or 4 layups that just went in and out, like just didn't fall. He's had a lot of those this year, but I think he kind of like fades on his layups. Like he's not going up strong. He's kind of like, there's going to be contact here. I don't want to get contacted, and so he kind of fades a little bit, and he's not really like absorbing the contact or going in, seeking contact, which is one thing he needs to do. He doesn't shoot many free throws. That's one thing I like was thinking about it the other day. I'm like, is he a good free throw shooter? Because like I don't think
really
he gets fouled ever.
Yeah.
For a 7-footer who's on the 3-point line a lot, but I think number one, like that's strength. He's got to get a lot stronger. But obviously I think seeking that contact, because like I said, I don't know, like, is he a good free throw shooter or no? I think he probably is decent for a 7-footer, but he really doesn't get to the line. So I'd like to see him get to the line a lot more.
Just with that, I think that's a great point, Craig. And I think actually making some threes now should make that easier. Like people will actually have to close out on him with the intention of not shooting 6 of them a game and making half of them. So now it should be easier for him to be a driver, and a big dude like that with a decent handle and a decent first step. Like, once he gets ahead of steam, I think teams are going to have to kind of put him on the line a lot more. And then they're also going to want to do what you just said. Like they haven't seen if he can shoot free throws or not. So rather than let him hit half of his threes, let's foul him and see what he does there. My guess is he's at minimum, a low 70s free throw shooter once he starts getting some volume. So I think that's still a good play for the Wizards. And now all of a sudden you've made him more versatile. So where I was going, hey, let's start with some drives and things like that and work our way out. Well, now when he's making some threes, that actually might enable him to kind of go the other way too. So the versatility is cool there. That's what good to see. I think just being around, the other young guys, like the chemistry there is pretty good. The ball movement's really good. I think they're starting to get him the ball in spots like where he's just better suited to make them. My problem, I guess, was less about the threes and more about like the weird step back. So he catches it, at 20 feet and then has to step back 3 steps to take the shot. Like guys are getting into him in his spots and he's taking rhythm jumpers. And, you can live with a missed wide open 3 if a guy's shown he can make a few of them and, set up to actually take that shot too. So I think that's great to see their kind of chemistry developing, a little bit already.
I mean, yeah, it's whenever you see like late game, I think it was against the Hornets in the second game that they
Mhm.
ended up winning. They closed with that lineup of the young
Yeah.
guys, especially even against New York. They
Mhm.
closed with I think all three rookies, Champagny, and
And
I don't know who the
Beal?
fifth guy was. I think yeah, it was Bilal,
Yeah.
because he took the shot at the end. But like they're getting more reps, and that's why these close games are cool because like these young
Yeah.
guys are getting reps in these situations. And in the beginning, they folded. Like they really didn't want to
Mhm.
take the shot. They didn't know what they were doing. They just got outmatched. But that's fine. Like when they lose games because they don't have the experience, they don't have the talent.
All
That's
good.
that's okay.
Yeah.
It's the beginning of the season, the long losing streak when they were just losing games based on effort and game plan and defensive effort and all that type of stuff, specifically. But I think when you see Alex Sarr playing with Bub playing with him and George and all of them kind of playing together, they like to play fast. They like to play similar speeds and similar games. And I think, like you mentioned, it kind of rubs off on Sarr. And when a guy like Sarr is finally making his jumpers, it kind of probably rubs off on George because George has struggled for a while.
Yeah,
Um,
that's tough.
and
It's good to see
he had
that if you're him, like, "Oh, this guy turned it
yeah.
around, I can turn it around too."
I mean, he had an individual 7-0 run against Chicago that really blew the game
Mhm.
open to start the fourth.
Yeah.
I think he had finished with 9 points. The game before, he had a couple threes as well. So, like, he's figuring it out. Bub Carrington, I mean, he had one of his best games of the season against, I think it was the Hornets.
Sounds right.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but he was great in that game. And so you're kind of seeing the rookies figure it out and start kind of figuring it out first. I think has opened the door for everyone else, like you said, to see like, look, I might be struggling now, but I can figure it out.
Yeah, let's, give a shout out to Koulibaly here too. Obviously, the Chicago game didn't work out for him well because of the illness. I think struggled a good amount in that most recent Knicks game. Went 1 for 10, finished with 6 points, but had 6 assists, was trying to play make a little bit. I thought that was good. But prior to that, he was coming off an 18-point performance against the Knicks where they lost in overtime, went 8 of 17. I love him getting 17 shots up. I think that was probably like the ideal loss. They played a really good team tough. And you could just see the difference. Like, they had a closer in Brunson, and without Poole, the Wizards didn't have anybody kind of to close that game. That's fine, but 18 points there, 6 rebounds, 6 assists, 2 steals, 1 block. That was awesome. Against Charlotte, 20 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists. Very cool to see that too. And then a double-double against Milwaukee. And I don't think that game was as close as maybe the final score. They ended up only losing by, 10 or 11 points, but he had 20 points, 12 rebounds, 5 assists, 3 steals, 1 block. I'm even okay with the 3 turnovers because it means he's trying to make things happen. So I've liked the way Koulibaly's played. We mentioned Champagny. That's been awesome to see. You mentioned a name here, Greg, that we have not talked about on this show for a while, and I've got to just give an update for folks here. The Yannick Nzosa update. This is our yearly, once-a-year segment on the show here where we just let you know on his development. He has played 14 games for Baloncesto Unilabrada in the second division in Spain. 1 start in those 14 games. He's averaging 18 minutes a game, 7 points per game. He's currently shooting 53% from the field, 0% from the 3-point line, making about 2 free throws a game at about 76%. We'll take that. And he's averaging 5 rebounds, a little less than half an assist, a little less than half a steal, 1.6 blocks. So he's basically playing in the equivalent of like college basketball's, mid-major ranks, multiple years here into his professional career, and just now getting to the point where he's averaging about 7 and 5. So, at this rate, I would say by the time Yannick is 30 years old, he might be ready to come over and try his hand at another NBA Summer League level experience. So, hey, we'll take that.
Yeah, that'd be sick. Maybe the Wizards by that time will be competing. Do they still
Right, there
hold
you go.
his? Do they
He could
still
be the
hold his
missing
draft
piece.
rights?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do they
That would
still
be.
hold his draft rights?
They still hold his draft right. So if he ever
Yeah,
eventually does come over here, he's a Wizard, baby, unless they
nice.
they decide they want to move on from a special talent like that.
I mean, I don't know why they. I mean, yeah, we'll we'll see.
So anyway, we'll see how that one plays out long term here. Not sort of betting on any inclusion there, but a Wizards center that is playing particularly well here. Wizards Trash Talker asked, "What's your ideal return for Jonas Valanciunas? Someone will have to pick up all these minutes At center, I think we would see a return to the rotation for Rashawn Holmes, especially with Bagley still banged up. Maybe a little bit more Tristan Vukcevic at that point. They will have gotten him up to speed. Just continuing the monumental love fest here. Another cool Chase Hughes stat. No player in NBA history has had more double-doubles in games that they played under 25 minutes than Jonas Valanciunas. So the man is super productive in a limited amount of time. And I think there is a team out there that will say, 2 second-round picks, yeah, that's worth it for us to just get a little depth piece on the interior. So I do think it's a pretty foregone conclusion. He's not on this roster after the deadline. If I'm the Wizards, I saw, what teams just got for old what's his face. Why am I having a senior moment from Brooklyn? Johnson. Help me out
Finney
here,
Smith.
Greg.
Finney Smith.
Thank you. I mean, you just got what Brooklyn got 2 second-round picks back, basically in
3. I
3.
think.
Okay, so if you get 2 for Valanciunas, I think that's really, good enough for you here at this point. I think.
Yeah, I think, and the key part about that is I think all 3 of the Lakers picks that they sent were their own, and I don't know how many they additionally own, but I know that they have a bunch of first-round picks, and I think from what people ask, like ideally, you somehow get a first-round pick if the Lakers are desperate, they need a center, and I think the only thing that would help the Wizards to that point is that there's other suitors for Valanciunas. Because, I don't know what the center market has. I know there's a lot of centers on the market, but I think Valanciunas is probably the best center option on the open market. And so if you got a bunch of teams that are suitors for him and they bid against themselves, I think that's the only way you can get a first. I think it's interesting because you mentioned, like, he should be dealt by the deadline. But, like, if they had a guy like Tyus Jones and Shamet on expiring deals and they still couldn't get anything done for a couple seconds, how stubborn are they going to be this time around with a guy like Valanciunas, who they're like, we don't have to trade him. We have him for 2 more years after that on a bargain contract, about $10 million a year. I mean, maybe if you give us a first-round pick, we'll give him to you now. But if you don't, we're fine keeping him and then trading him maybe in the offseason or next February. So that's another piece that they can hold where I think last year, and I mentioned this when they signed Valanciunas to a 3-year contract, like teams like Minnesota were like, you have to trade us Tyus Jones. If you don't, he's going to leave.
Yeah, there's no leverage at that point. Right?
Exactly. And I think the fact that it's a 3-year deal, and this is when we signed JV, this is my main point, is like, I like that it's long because a 3-year deal means we don't have to move him now. We have leverage. You, the Lakers, you have a year or 2 left of LeBron and AD and all that. You need him now. And if you really want him, then cough up a protected, first-round pick, top 10 protected this year, or we're going to ship him off somewhere else. And I think that's cool with Valanciunas, but I do think a couple seconds is what you'll probably end up getting.
Yeah, being able to negotiate from a position of strength is always good. And I do think hopefully they've learned their lesson about hanging on to guys a little bit too long. We're seeing with the Kuzma trade, they've probably, I don't know, we'll see. Maybe we'll talk Kuzma here in a minute. But if you're Valanciunas, I think 2 second-round picks, like real second-round picks, is the number. If it's top 50 protected or something like that, a team can kick rocks. But if you think you get the 35th pick in a draft somewhere, ostensibly like a fake first-round pick, I would do that too. And yeah, I think for you, like I was wondering about this in our group chat the other day about like what's the sweet spot number of years left on a Poole contract if you traded him. But the same thing applies to Valanciunas. The number is so low that 10-ish million a year, whatever the case is there, like I think a team can easily swallow that and they can figure out how to move on from him too if it doesn't work out, because it's not some poison pill where you're screwing yourself long term by taking on multiple years of bad money. So I think that's kind of nice. Greg Castillo asked in the chat here, is Kispert surviving? He can't be traded right now, so yes, but I do think the Wizards have only had success so far trading their other young players in Gafford and Avdia. So if I'm Kispert, this offseason or this year pre-draft, I would be starting to I don't know. I wouldn't be extending my lease on my apartment. Let's put it that way.
I mean, I think at the beginning of the year, it was if he gets extended, I could very well see him staying for a bit. But if they did not extend him, he's an expiring deal. Like you have his bird rights, but that's important for other teams too. If you can make a trade for a guy, you get his bird rights too. Like it's I would have been more leading towards him getting dealt. I think in the beginning of the year, he started really slow, and you've
Yeah.
seen him figure it out as the year has gone on. I mean, he's been pretty impressive off the bench lately. The whole bench unit, him, Brogdon, and Valanciunas have been the reason the Wizards have stayed in and won some of these games. So again, I think what Matt said at the beginning of the show is important. You need veterans to go along with the young guys. You need guys to keep them in check for them to learn from. But also when you're playing, like you need to play good basketball to learn good habits, and, to learn how to play the right way. And I think the steadying presence of these vets has helped. And I don't think the Wizards should be in a rush or will be in a rush to trade a guy like Kispert. And honestly, for a contender, like I feel like the ideal guy is a 3-and-D guy.
Mhm.
I don't know who really wants to cough up a first round pick for a specialist. And while Corey is more than just a 3-point shooter now, he can put the ball on the deck still. Defensively, again,
Yeah.
I don't know if a
Gotta improve
contending
there.
I don't know if a contending team wants to trade that big of an asset in a first round pick for Kispert, and I don't think the Wizards are ever going to think about moving Kispert for anything less than a first round pick at this rate. So I don't think it would make sense, and I just don't think it works for both parties to move him right now.
You mentioned it with Valanciunas, like being able to have that flexibility that if a move comes along in the offseason or draft day, he sweetens the deal for something like, so be it. But yeah, if he plays well enough that a team wants that, that's great. You mentioned the veterans around him. Like, again, as much as we've talked about the improved play of Jordan Poole, he's still not like a traditional set guys up, create, easy looks for them kind of point guard. And I do think that's been a learning curve for Kispert here a little bit, or learning curve for both of them, right? How to get you the ball in the right spots to be successful. So I think not having Tyus Jones a little bit hurt him. And I also always thought that like when Kuzma was at his best as sort of a downhill driver, he was also really good at finding Kispert on those kickouts. So Kuzma not being, Kuzma from 2 years ago, I actually think has been a disservice for Kispert here. So Brogdon coming in has maybe steadied that a little bit here for him. So you wouldn't want to sell low on Kispert even if you could trade him right now. So I think not having to worry about that, it just frees him up to let him play, kind of his style and get a little rhythm going. And he's too good a shooter to be as bad as he was to start the year. Brian Keefe said that he's done nothing to change the mechanics on his jump shot. I'm still, I don't know, it smells a little fishy to me because the ball does appear to have a little bit more arc on it, but I guess coach would know, better than I would, but whatever he's doing, it's working at a better rate. And, we'll see. And that should make everybody else look a little bit better too, just to have the spacing he provides.
Yeah. I mean, I think the way that Kispert was playing before the injury and then, a 5-game absence comes back and it's an improved shot. Again, I don't think that just happens with rest. Maybe it does, but
Yeah.
I feel like maybe he switched something up because it does look like there's more arc on his jumper. Nonetheless, whether he did anything or it is better.
Yeah.
He's playing
It's working
better.
out.
And when the three's not falling, it's tough for him to generate looks elsewhere. But when it's falling, the guy's got to respect it. He can put the ball on the deck, get into the paint, hit a couple nice floaters against Chicago. So I think he's playing a lot better. It's kind of what the Corey Kispert of last year looked like. Less minutes, less of a role, but again, I can't see a team coughing up a first round pick for Corey, even if he was playing at the way that he's been playing now all season. I don't see a team doing that unless he can play defense, and we know what that is. So.
Yeah, if all he does is provide a little spacing to make life a little easier for your rookies as they improve, and you're bad defensively anyway, and you just play out the rest of his contract, like he's not hurting you. So I don't think there's any kind of worry there. And honestly, Greg, I'm still just disappointed in myself. I couldn't remember Dorian Finney-Smith. He's such a notable NBA player. Never get old. You start to forget all those random guys. So that's what I rely on you for, is to pull names like that and Yannick Nzosa out of the hat. Let's talk Kuzma here for a minute. Mark Stein reported that Kyle Kuzma could be on the move back maybe to Dallas again this time, and that Kuzma would be more receptive to such a trade. And, I think that's fine. That makes sense for him as a fit. Like we talked about this a lot, Jihadi and I on the show here, of just sending guys to better situations. It still makes you like, while you're bad, you're going to have to bring in some of these veteran free agent guys. And if they know that you're going to try to put them in good positions and not, ship them off to Siberia, I think that's that's better for you in the long run. So working with Kuzma to find a trade is great. But I do think the play we've seen from him in the last 2 games here kind of solidifies, that point that they are trying to make a deal done. Like the Kuzma we've seen is much more in line with how contending teams are going to want to use him as a versatile downhill driver. He can play make a little bit. He can rebound. He can grab and go coming off the bench. So you're not playing him so many minutes. You're burying him, as he comes back from an injury. It's just sort of like let's get you some cardio and show teams you're in shape and you can do what you need for them. And it's this sort of like soft showcase, in my opinion. But it just so happens that this Kuzma that playoff teams want to see is also what Wizards fans would have wanted to see from the start with him this year too. So I don't know. It seems to me like a real where there's smoke, there's fire situation. And I think the play so far kind of supports that.
Yeah, you mentioned like even the Chicago game, like he didn't like go off, but he played solid. Like I thought he was making the right play. He really didn't score, but like he was defending and he was kind of doing everything you wanted him to do just without, forcing too many shots. The offense wasn't run through him. And I think that's where he probably excels at, playing off of guys instead of being that primary shot maker and shot creator. And that's where he's best. And so, like, it's funny because when you played with Brad and KP, and even before KP, when we had Pope and Trez and all them, that was the best I'd seen him play his whole career.
Sure.
And now you look at it when he was moved on ball and he was the top guy. It didn't go that way because he's not a top guy. I don't even think he's a number 2 or number 3. I think he needs to play as a secondary playmaker, a shot creator or shot maker that can space the floor. And I feel like when he's not going so hard to create offense, there's more effort on defense. He has more energy there. And I just think, it was never going to work as the top guy in DC. I think every single person, probably himself included, knew that. It was this whole facade of let's make it work until it's not going to work anymore. And I think we're at the point where it's not going to work anymore. To where, I mean, he's averaging the lowest points per game of his career since his last year in LA when he was a 6th man. He's averaging 8 less points per game than last season. He's shooting way less inefficient from the field, 42% from the field. I mean, 26% from 3. Like, again, I think you're completely right here. Like, they're playing him. They want to showcase what he has. Because what team saw in the beginning of the year is probably not what Kuzma is. He's a lot better than what he's shown. And I think they want to get him into a role where he's not having to do so much, but he's kind of playing, like you said, a similar role to what you might see on a Dallas team or on the Kings or something like that. And so I think the writing is on the wall. It's just a matter of like, can they get the value? Because I think what Mark Stein said is like Kuz didn't ask out of DC, but he would kind of accept a move rather than decline a move like he did last year.
It never makes no sense. Mentioned in the chat that Jake Fisher has also reported Dallas has no interest in matching salary for Kuzma. So that basically means only LA and Sacramento have interest. I would also counter with that. It's also smokescreen season. And if I'm Dallas, I wouldn't say, yes, we desperately need Kyle Kuzma either, because that limits their leverage. Where somebody like Mark Stein, who's really more locked in, in somewhere like Dallas, I think might have a little bit more read on what their kind of actual interest is. That's no disrespect to Jake. He's sort of missed on a couple of these, the last couple of years here. And I think that's just based on intel teams are giving out. So it's not necessarily like a disservice to him. It's just, this is what teams are going to tell you. So it's really, you're going to hear some contradictory reporting the next couple of weeks here. But either way, it's just, can a competitive team make a case for someone like that? And honestly, there are teams that may not want to trade for him, but their situation may dictate it ultimately as they get closer to the deadline. Someone like Dallas, they're 5th seed in the West right now, 20-14. But they're 4-6 in their last 10 games. They've lost 3 games in a row. They might just need a little extra scoring punch here at some point because they're just not getting it, realistically from some of these other ancillary pieces on their team. Can they consistently get stuff from Jaden Hardy? Can Quentin Grimes consistently give them, the 17 points he had the other night? Like, is PJ Washington going to be in single digits? Like, there just probably has to be a 3rd/4th guy there, especially on nights when Luka doesn't play. So, it's just going to be one of those things they're going to have to explore all their options, I think is how I would put that. So going to be interesting to follow. Ultimately, I think, we'll see how it works out. Again, that never makes no sense. Said Jake and Mark Stein are working together now. That's great. Guys present, contrary reporting all the time from the same company. So we'll see how that actually plays out. And maybe they have no interest now. Maybe they have no interest ever. I don't actually really care personally where he goes. I do think it is, like I said, to their interest to send him somewhere good. Ultimately, why is a bad team trading for Kuzma anyway? But we'll see what the market is. Greg, if you had to bet, is he a Wizard after the trade deadline?
I say no. I get, like you said, I think the writing's on the wall. You can kind of see it. I don't want to read body language, but I don't know. I feel like at the beginning of last year, and Kuz was kind of, and this is from an outsider's perspective, but I feel like he was kind of posting stuff on social media with the guys and retweeting stuff and reposting stuff and kind of everything Jordan Poole is doing now with the young guys. It's what Kuz did and also wanted to do to be this leader. And we haven't seen that. And that's from an outsider's perspective. I don't know if that's the case. But at the same time, it doesn't feel the same. It doesn't feel the same as it did last year when Kuz was all in on being a part of this team for the long haul. It feels different. And that's why I bet on him getting moved. And I think the situation's different too. I think it makes sense. The fact that apparently he's willing to accept a move rather than decline it. I think it just all culminates in they probably will move him. I think they should.
Yeah.
It's not
It's
like a Poole situation where I think Poole makes everybody better. I don't know what Kuzma does to really make all the young guys better to help their development. And so I think, on the court, I don't think, it would make the most sense to keep him. I think, if you get what you can get now, even if it's just a first round pick when you probably could have gotten 2 a couple years ago, I think you take it. And I think the Wizards are going to do that. So I would bet that he's not a Wizard after February.
Yeah, if you're going to use him more as a wing like that, I think they've tried to do this season when he's been healthy, that sort of landlocks Koulibaly, George, Champagny a little bit too. So there's just other mouths to feed there. I think the timing makes sense. So just see what you can kind of get from him from a momentum standpoint over the next month, maybe, and then you take the best offer and you just sort of live with the consequences. But again, same principle applies that he's not actively asking out for a trade based on what we're hearing so far. So it's nice to know that you don't have the ticking clock. I will say from Kuzma's perspective, he gets the business portion of it better than a lot of guys. So I think he probably knows the Wizards are more likely to trade him if they can get their best return. So even if he does want to be traded, not demanding a trade publicly probably helps actually facilitate him going, to a better spot. So I think him working with them is in everybody's best interest here. Greg, anything we haven't touched on here that you want to hit before we close this thing out?
I mean, we talked about Champagny. I want to talk about him again. He's been so good.
Yeah.
And I feel like nobody really talks about him. And it's funny because if there were a guy like Champagny on the Lakers and he was going off like this, it would be everywhere.
Yeah, national story.
But I mean, even Jordan Poole can't really get much coverage on ESPN nowadays because he's on the Wizards. So I want to talk. I mean, Champagny's been so great on both ends. What I don't really get is I guess, and you probably know more about this than me, but it's 50 games. I think they upped it to where if you're on a 2-way contract, you can be a part of the NBA team. But I would assume they haven't converted him because they want to keep roster flexibility open for trades, and then maybe after the deadline they convert him. Because can you sign another guy who's on a 2-way deal to a standard deal? Is that like the NFL, you can poach off of the practice squad?
So there are some limitations to a player moving on from a 2-way contract with one team to another. I don't think I think some amount of compensation has to change hands if you do that. It's probably not anything heavy or serious, but there have been situations where guys leave 2-way contracts to go end up with another team. It's usually been more the team releases them from their 2-way and then they go end up in another situation. So I don't really know enough about how that works just because there still aren't a ton of examples even after all these 2-way contracts that have been used. But yeah, they don't have a roster spot right now. So I think converting him is going to be a long-term play. And honestly, just kind of the way they've used their roster spots, you may not see him get converted at all this year, and maybe the end of the season kind of thing, but they might leave that roster spot open to add, a piece off another team's G League team or another young guy that gets let go at the deadline or something like that, just to add another piece. And then they'll try to take care of him, with a more guaranteed deal for next year, but I would be working on the terms of said deal with him and his agent, immediately here just to keep him here long term. It would be too Wizards a move to, develop this guy and kind of find this diamond in the rough and then let him move on for nothing. But then again, you're also not going to break the bank to keep him, situationally too. So it's going to have to be kind of that sweet spot. Maybe if they are willing to invest early here, that allows you to lock him up. So we'll see what that looks like. But yeah, I wouldn't bet on, him getting converted to anything here until after the deadline, until there's actually a roster spot, and there's no way they're going to let him go. So I think at the very least you see him here through the end of the year, and then it'll just be a matter of what price tag is he willing to sign for long term.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people were shocked he's only 23 when I tweeted out his stats from that one game. He could be a real piece here. And I think the Wizards would be prudent to just lock him down while they can, versus anything else that could happen in free agency. So,
other thing worth noting here, this is his 4th NBA season, so he is not eligible for a 2-way contract beyond this season anyway. So if you're Champagnie, the time was now to prove you're an NBA player, because if he hadn't shown what he's shown so far, he probably wasn't going to get, a guaranteed or even a non-guaranteed deal from some team next year. But I think it's a slam dunk just based on the sample size so far this year. And honestly, this is a guy that I thought was a productive college player, but he's been more valuable for Washington this last, several game stretch than we think. The other thing the Wizards probably can do here too is, he had the 31-point game and he's had 15 of them against Chicago. But while they're kind of, I don't want to say featuring or showcasing Kuzma, Champagnie is probably the odd man out, where if he doesn't have it going, or in that one Knicks game where Keyshawn was a little bit, he was having one of his better games, maybe you don't see a ton of Champagnie, and they can use that as leverage of well, you're not an everyday guy for us. So, who knows what negotiating is already kind of happening behind the scenes here. But yeah, I think Wizards fans kind of universally would agree on him being a guy we're interested in seeing here long term. So I'm glad you brought him back up, and he deserves all the flowers he's getting right now.
Yeah, I fully agree.
Greg, thank you for doing this. You deserve all the flowers that you can get as well here for doing this on short notice. I'm getting ready to go out of town for a bit here, so I wanted to get one of these in desperately, and I appreciate you making yourself available to do that and fighting through some technical issues. So I appreciate you doing it. For anybody who is not already following you and your podcast, please tell them where they can find you.
You can find me at Greg Finberg on Twitter. You can also, it's the Wizards podcast on Apple, Spotify. Posting about once or twice a week, all things Wizards. So yeah, you can find me there. Again, thanks for having me on. I always like doing this, Matt. So even short notice, I'll always be here. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, man. Thank you, sir. All right, everybody. Thank you all for listening. Hope everybody's new year is off to a great start here. It's been fun to watch the Wizards. I think that's all something we wanted. That's our New Year's resolution, is to just not be psychos about it and just try to be, patient and enjoy the experience with the young guys here too. So we'll see how it goes. As everybody knows, we really, really appreciate some iTunes reviews. So do that for Greg's podcast as well if you get an opportunity to do that. And a like here, if you're watching this on YouTube, is always appreciated. We're brought to you by betonline.ag, and we'll catch you all next time.